Welcome everyone. I think it's lunchtime there, so we'll just give it a little bit more time for people to grab whatever they're eating and settle in for the webinar. So we'll just wait for a few more people to trickle in and then we'll kick off. So we're just going to give it a couple more minutes, given it's lunchtime, for people to trickle in. But if you wanted to, you could test out the chat functionality and just put in where you're dialing in from, and we'll get started in a couple more minutes. So I think we've had a few more people join. So thank you everyone for joining our In Conversation With series here. So we're doing our Australia chapter, and we've selected Stake to speak with today. So we'll get going very shortly, but I just wanted to call out, there is the chat functionality in the right-hand side there, so you can connect with other participants there. And then if you do have any questions for Alex and myself, feel free to put that in the Q&A section there, and we'll address those questions. Hopefully throughout the conversation, we'll be able to address those, but otherwise we'll leave some time at the end where we can do Q&A, and we'll also jump into those questions there and respond to those there. And any that we don't get a chance to cover, we'll certainly follow up with you on those. So yeah, the In Conversation With series is where we speak with data and product experts and sort of uncover how they're using product analytics to solve their key business challenges. And so today I'll be hosting the session. So my name is Phil. I look after the sales for Mixpanel in Australia and New Zealand. And we're very fortunate to have Alex with us today, who is the lead product manager from Stake. So I'll let him firstly just do a quick introduction and also maybe touch on how he got into the product management space as well. I think a lot of people are interested in this space, so I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, thanks, Phil. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. So obviously, thanks to Mixpanel for having me, and hopefully, those Mixpanel drop the experts. We'll put that to the test. I don't know, but no, very, very happy to be here. I think in terms of how I got into product, I always think it's everyone kind of has their own version of it. It's a pretty new career path, in inverted commas. Like, I think it's had a lot of different iterations probably over the last 15 or 20 years, and it's really blown up, particularly in the last 5. I think as apps have just become part of everyone's daily lives, and often what a lot of their time and kind of the organization of their life is now, a lot of it's executed through mobile apps, and obviously product teams are kind of is essential to a lot of that development and that strategic how businesses actually build out those strategies and execute those strategies. For me, it was I studied commerce at university. I worked a lot of different jobs through university. I definitely prioritized working over university. that was definitely the outcome. I worked in a heap of different businesses, and I really enjoyed that kind of being in a smaller business, and whether that be hospitality, whether it be, my mates had their own landscaping business, so I worked for a few startups and things like that. I just love the nature of like being in an environment where you can get stuck in, and you're not really like beholden to anyone, but your own ability to just push yourself and kind of see what we can do. After university, I kind of was looking at the very traditional finance roles, going to one of the big four in Australia or something like that, or one of the consulting firms, and I think I was pretty disheartened by just the big nature, the kind of rigid nature of those businesses. And I was talking to a friend of mine who had a family friend who had a startup, and had founded a number of startups, and kind of exited out of them, and this was her fourth startup. And he just said that she was wanting to he wanted to chat to someone or something like that. To be honest, I was pretty unprepared. I kind of just like I rolled in thinking it was just going to be a chat, and they were in full interview mode, and that probably helped me, to be honest, because I was pretty relaxed. And yeah, I decided to just take the plunge. So I picked up a job there. It was a bit of a jack of all trades. At the time, it was probably about 30 or so employees, the vast majority of which were developers. It was kind of myself as a BA, another BA, and then the CEO and the founder. So it was an amazing environment to be in. Super grateful to that job. It gave me an incredible amount of responsibility at a young age, and I just like took like it to a duck to water. I think I really enjoyed, as I say, just being able to get stuck in and not really, you walk into work every day and you're kind of, okay, well, what am I doing today? How do I add value? There's no playbook per se. It's kind of just like I was just getting deep on Medium blogs, product books, whatever it may be. That role naturally kind of progressed more into a bit of like business analyst, kind of relationship manager with our partners. I spent 2 years in the US with it. Business transformation. We bought a few businesses and kind of went through and applied technology to very old archaic businesses from the ground up. And then so that was kind of one half of it, and the other half of it was being a product manager to the team of about 30 or 40 developers that we had back in Sydney. So it's a bit of a burning the candle at both ends kind of role. And I think I really enjoyed it, but you get to a point where I always talk about it with members in my team. It's like you're in terms of experience, like you're a net giver, and then there's a net taker, and then there's a net giver side to it. And what that means is like you're in a role where you're learning an incredible amount, and in that sense, it's like you're still fulfilling your role, but there's this like level of experience that sits above you where you're like, you just feel like you're drinking from a fire hose. And then naturally everyone gets to positions in roles where they feel as if they're pretty comfortable, like they kind of get what they need to do and how they can add value. And I think then to stay motivated, you've got to really love what you're doing in the space you're in. I think that's what I found at my previous role was, it didn't really speak to what I was really interested in, which was ultimately, investing and I guess like personal finance in a sense. And so I decided to move on. And originally I was looking for jobs in the US, and it was kind of mid-COVID, so that was pretty hard as an Australian. And so I came back to Australia and found Stake, which was amazing. It was probably the best decision I've made. I jumped back into a very early startup. It was a bit of a shock, kind of walking into the back of a jewelry store. There's one room office behind a jeweler.
Wow.
And I haven't looked back since. It's been an amazing ride, and I think it was so awesome to kind of come from a business where I'd been part of taking it from being really small up to being a much more mature business, and kind of all of the structures that come with that, and was lucky to be in a business that was incredibly technically able, to then jump back into a small small startup, a very small startup, and kind of come with that experience and be like, hey guys, actually, this is what we need to be thinking about. This is some of the decisions and mistakes that we'd made at my previous role, and how can we go and not make those mistakes here? And it was not only from a product perspective, that's what I came in to do. I came in as the first product manager, but wider than that, it's like, well, what are our policies as a business? How do we get everyone to have their own devices? What's the security on that device? Like, how do you start thinking about just like general business maturity things, which again, I think is a really interesting part of the product role, is depending on where you are, like what business you're in, it can be much wider than just, how do we develop an app? And I love that about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. And so, given that we're going to be talking about Stake, well, product analytics in the context of Stake, maybe just for the benefit of the audience, if you're able just to give a bit of background on Stake.
Yeah, for sure. So Stake is a retail investment platform in Australia and New Zealand. We also operate in the UK, but to a much lesser extent. Really, our major market is Australia and New Zealand. Our founder, Matt Leibowitz, was an options trader at one of the big options firms called Optimise. So he was there for about 10 years. He led one of the desks in Chicago, which is where a lot of the big options or derivatives trading firms are based out of. And we kind of connected originally on that around the US and the market over there, and it's such an exciting place from the US investment market, Wall Street, as we coined it at Stake. And really where Stake started was when Matt moved back to Australia. It was like, I need that like energy of the US market, and it's missing in Australia. And how do we there's this opportunity to bring that to Australia, and that's where Stake started in bringing Wall Street equities to Australians, but doing it in a way that was like, how do you bring the excitement of the US market to Australia? And from there, we've then expanded into Aussie equities as well. And really now it's about being the best place to buy and sell US and Australian equities in Australia and New Zealand, really. So, the way that I kind of speak about it is, as an Australian, like you bank at one of the big four, but you invest at Stake. And that's really our goal.
Okay. And so sort of given that positioning and what you're offering, and this is going to be sort of like quite a broad ranging question, but in terms of so then how do you go about acquiring users, then, managing the continuous engagement so you are retaining those users that you have?
Yeah, I think it's changed quite a bit for us over the course of our life, and that's very natural. Where it started, as I say, was really around that core kind of cultural premise of how do you bring the excitement of the US market to Australians. And at its core, it was around access. Like, how do you make access to the US market easier than it's ever been before? And I think the core pillars of acquisition that we had there was really, one, speaking to that mission, building the brand around that, building the product experience around that, and building our content experience around that. And so it was very, I guess, what you'd probably deem like product-led growth for the first few years. I think 60% of our acquisitions came from referral. It's a really, really effective channel for us. And it also meant that you're incredibly close to your customers as you're building, so it's like you're getting customers that are speaking about Stake, telling their friends about Stake. That's how you're growing. And then you're obviously seeing that feedback. I think as we've matured, particularly in the last few years and going into Aussie equities, and I guess, as I say, the original strategy was bringing the US to Australia when Stake started. 2% of the Australian investment market was in international equities, which the vast majority of that was obviously US equities. This year, I think it's about 20% of the Australian investment market is in international equities, and Stake is the largest international broker in Australia. So, I think we've been helped by the tailwinds of the last 3 years, but I also would like to say that Stake had an input in increasing the market share of international equities in Australia. We've now obviously moved into Aussie equities, and taking taking a much more mass market approach as a result. So we've turned to being a lot more scientific with methodology to acquiring customers. We still we still love to rely on referral. It probably represents about 40% of our onboards acquisition. But now we're really looking at how do we be more scientific around where we're acquiring, what segments we're targeting, how we're using performance marketing, how we're using out of home, general kind of like how do we be more scientific with our reach campaigns, how do we speak to customers, segment customers as early in the process as possible, optimize spend, suppression tactics are becoming more and more important from our performance strategy perspective. So I think in terms of how that dovetails into the use of data, it's critical. Like in order to be more scientific, you need to be quantitative in how you're acquiring customers. And we've put a lot of investment in building a stack that enables us to do that, which obviously Mixpanel is a core part of that.
Yep. Okay, and then how do you sort of think about segmenting those customers?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably two ways. I think you can segment obviously your existing customer base, and that can give you a really good understanding of where you are. I think what we found when we did a massive segmentation process probably about a year ago, and that was obviously an initial consideration, and it's not really where you are, but where you want to be. So we actually went the other way. We kind of looked at everyone but a state customer. Let's go and segment the entire investment market in Australia. And so it was a big process that we undertook between product and marketing, and a heap of qualitative interviews, a lot of quantitative analysis of investment, wide industry reports and things like that. And we basically segmented the entire retail investment market into like 11 segments, and then picked out the 3 that we felt we were most able to target and would be of the highest value to stakes. It's got to work in both ways, right? Like you've got to be able to target those customers and bring the customers value, but those customers have also got to bring the business value. So kind of found out our sweet spot, and then we overlaid that into our existing customer base and basically said, okay, well, how representative of our existing customers of these segments? And luckily they're very representative, which is good. So it kind of it helps to validate that you are able to target those customers, and obviously they do bring you value. And that's really the segments that we then approach everything from. It's kind of like what segment are we targeting with this particular tactic or strategy, and how do we best execute on, and obviously making sure that it speaks to that segment.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. And then earlier you were mentioning product-led growth, and so that's naturally something that Mixpanel firmly believes in for our own product, but then supporting our users in that journey as well. And then you also talked about obviously the evolving product or offering, I should say. So yeah, I was just curious to sort of understand how you go about continuously evolving the product, especially as you're adding additional markets and services.
Yeah, I think at the moment, to date, there's probably been 2. I think actually, to be honest, there's always 2 sides to this. It's kind of like the big knowns, like the big rocks that you have to do, and the stake. I think we're still pretty deep in a foundational stage of just getting to our core competency. Like as I say, what do we want to be? We want to be the best place for Australian and New Zealanders to invest in US and Australian equities. Well, we don't currently offer Australian equities in New Zealand, for example. So that's just we have to do it at some point in the near future. So then there's kind of those foundational rocks that in order to execute on the strategy of your mission and your core competency, they're kind of just no-brainers. But then there's all of the iteration that happens in the day-to-day around how you take those things to market and how you ensure that they're working in the best way for customers. And I think that's really where that kind of product analytics and product-led growth, it's kind of like when the rubber hits the road in a sense. And I think we do that every day, and in every kind of little decision that we're making. Should we tweak this, or what's the most valuable part of this new feature that we've released, or are customers really interacting with this content? Well, obviously that's all serviced through our data model, and we're able to answer those questions in a number of seconds, and ultimately that allows you to then go and develop tactics and strategies to either address problems or to lean deeper into strengths.
Yep. Okay. A couple of questions have come through. So Tom's asked blog and recommendations. So maybe we'll give Alex some time. We can talk about those at the end. And then Mihrad has asked a question that's sort of quite technical, coming back to GDPR compliance. So at a first glance, it would be more sort of taking everyone to the higher standard. So looking at GDPR standards and then putting all of that data there, and so you could have it on a single dashboard. But I've got some technical team here. We can either maybe address that at the end or come back to you separately on that. So continue on from the evolution of the product, or how you're evolving the product there. So you mentioned obviously using product analytics to understand feature adoption and things like this. But maybe when you're before the update, do you have any decision frameworks or methods that you use to decide hey, I want to do this particular feature release? So do you have any decision frameworks that you leverage in that process?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the way that I tend to think about pretty much everything. I mean, I'm very much like the high kind of customer life cycle, I guess. And I think that there's a framework, and I'm going to quote it incorrectly because I've probably myself I've added a few additional letters to the acronym, but it's kind of like reach, acquisition, activation, how you retain customers, so retention, and then you're looking at referral, revenue, and churn. And that kind of is how I view the whole customer life cycle. So reach obviously is how do we go and get more reach for Stake? How do more customers or potential customers hear about Stake? Really, I should say, agent customers, potential customers. How are you then acquiring those customers, and how do you speak to them in different ways? As I said, we've segmented. We've got 3 key segments that we focus on. So our acquisition channels are kind of focused differently depending on the segment that we're targeting. How are you activating those customers? I think the classic here, and it seems to be the age-old quote that floats around. How true it is, I don't actually know, to be honest. I just read it all the time. But it's the 7 friends in 7 days for Facebook. It's kind of that idea that if you got a new Facebook user to add 7 friends in their first 7 days, then their likelihood of being a long-term Facebook user was 90% higher. I don't know if you remember years ago, probably when you set up a Facebook, but that was what it was all about. It was add a friend,
Yep.
people you may know, all that kind of stuff. So that's really activation. It's what's that point where a customer really has the value of the product is proved out, and therefore, they're not truly retained until they hit that point, or their likelihood of retention is very slow until they hit that point. And then you get into retention, which is obviously really around not only how do you keep a customer using your service, but how do you basically increase the value that they get from the service, and obviously the value they then give the service at the same time. So that's really where LTV analysis and that kind of stuff becomes vitally important. Referral, I think this is one that is often overlooked, but in speaking to product-led growth, it's how do you make your customers net promoters? And I think that's a really, for Stake particularly, and I think for any product really, if you hold that core, how do we just go and make an amazing experience that when someone comes in and they do something, in this case on Stake, they want to tell their friends about it. And that's like turn NPSs and all that. It's like turn your customers into net promoters. And then you've got to be thinking about revenue at the end of the day.
Of course,
it's probably in the last 10 years, I think VC and private equity and everything, it's like been everything but revenue. But ultimately, you've got to be thinking about revenue. So that's just critical. And then churn. I think you've got to understand why customers leave, what those key indicators are, and obviously how do you go and solve those problems and get ahead of it. So it's kind of how we think about everything in terms of a broad customer life cycle. I think in terms of your question originally around how do you take that framework into the decision around what to do and why, I think it gives you a good structure as to what you need to be hitting across. Where does that particular piece of functionality or that particular strategy lie, and then what do we need to be considering within that? So I think that's generally like how how I certainly approach the overarching and kind of road mapping of what Stake's doing, and then as you get into the detail of how you actually execute, I think it depends at which stage in that kind of framework you're focusing on. As I say, if it's something within the product, well, you're really focused on retention, you're really focused on referral, revenue, and churn. It's like, how do we make sure that this is adding value for customers? It's increasing, the value they see from Stake. How do you make sure that it's an amazing experience? How do you make sure that it's driving bottom line outcomes for Stake? And how do you make sure that we understand where customers, may not like certain things of this, or why this may cause them to churn, or how do we kind of, try to, I guess, block those holes in the bucket?
Okay, cool. That's like really comprehensive, and I'll have a follow-on question there, but regarding the aha moment, hopefully it's true, because we talk about it here that 7 friends in 7 days, it does get thrown around a lot. Internally, we know we have our own, what we define as that aha moment, and that's that first indication where someone is getting value from Mixpanel. So that concept is very true, and product analytics helps people uncover that. So Tom actually asked another good question there related to, sort of follows onto that theme of like how you make decisions. So you look at it across all of those different pillars within your product, or your sort of go to market more broadly. But Tom's asking, how much weight do you apply to qualitative and quantitative feedback at different stages of the product feature life cycle? So if we just maybe just talk about, from a Stake point of view, when you look at using qualitative analysis versus quantitative analysis, and so that should address sort of Tom's question there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think they're both critically important. I think qualitative analysis obviously is harder to compile, and probably has like a longer window. Like it's much more applicable at the strategic level, I'd probably say. And that's kind of how we think about it. It's like, how do you go and validate that at a qualitative level, and talking to people, it's something they want, it's something that they like. It's what are they saying about it generally? What are they saying about the market? What are they saying about what they'd like to, in Stake's case, look for in financial wealth? Like what's important to them in terms of their own personal strategies. It's what I would call like sample-based data. You're using a sample of customers to basically extrapolate those insights across the population. But vital to do, absolutely critical to do, and something that we do pretty much consistently. Like we're always, from a marketing and product perspective, we'd be having customer interviews, probably like once every couple of weeks, with an array of customers, and in a number of different ways. Like in some circumstances it's as Stake, in some circumstances it's as a random investment company. Like we actually act as if we're acting on behalf of an investment company doing, so you should kind of take the bias out of it. So a lot of different strategies there, and I think we draw a lot of great insights from qualitative data. In terms of the other side of it, quantitative is what I would call population-based data. What people say is often very different to what they do. And quantitative data gives you really, really actionable insights into that. So I think more from like a product development perspective, it's like qualitative data can give you the steer on where to go and why. Quantitative data ultimately validates that. And to be honest, can challenge it as well. I think we've seen that a number of times in our own development. So, Mixpanel's role in that, it's absolutely vital. Like, I mean, it's pretty much every day. The way that I think about it is it's hard. You got to kind of approach it from a question perspective. Like, ask yourself the question of what it is that you want to know. I.e., like, might be Stake Black is a premium subscription model that we have, and it might be, I want to understand what the most valuable feature is for Stake Black. And we kind of looked at that and we're like, okay, well, we don't really have the event structures in place to be able to answer this question. So let's go and implement the event structures. So we fired front-end events wherever we pushed up upsell journeys for Stake Black. So you'd click on a particular feature that was a Stake Black feature, you'd get the upsell journey. We collated that data for about a month, and then basically looked at from a particular upsell, what was the highest conversion to then actually purchasing Stake Black. So you find out that it was instant settlement of funds in the US. And that's something that qualitative data could never really give you with the same level of certainty. And in fact, it could actually point you in the wrong direction. Having said that, we supported what the most valuable feature in Stake Black was with qualitative data. So yeah, I think they're both critical. I think they have different use cases in the kind of product development life cycle. Quantitative data is incredibly efficient at getting to definitive outcomes that are applicable across the population.
Cool. Thank you for that. I recall an example of qualitative data at a theme park. They continuously surveyed people at the end of it asking about the food, and a lot of people were saying there should be more healthy options. And so then they actually adjusted the menu to be reflective of what those survey results were, yet no one was buying the healthy food. So people were sort of saying, yeah, I want healthy food, I should have healthy food. But when they changed the offering to be reflective of the survey results, the end result in terms of quantitative data didn't reflect that. So I do accept that there's a role for both, and I like the way you're taking the bias out of the potential surveys, but sometimes it can give you that bump steer, as you mentioned there. So Chris has come in with a question there. So do you do much around forecasting? Sorry, I need to see this again. Here we go. Forecasting of revenue/adoption when prioritizing features before building. And if so, do you compare those forecasts against actuals and identify gaps between the expected adoption, e.g. one segment versus another?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is something that we've over the last kind of 2 years, we've spent a lot more time putting a lot more onus on this, and really particularly for the product team to actually step up and kind of be accountable to the forecasts that we get to with finance. To keep that up originally last year, last financial year, and naturally when you first start doing it and holding yourself accountable to it, there are some teething issues, and you work out what works and what doesn't. And this year around, we've done it again. So it's a big process that we've been doing over the last few months. But I think certainly, like whenever we take any new product, I wouldn't really say it at a feature level, because I think you can have features within a product, and ultimately that product is driving the revenue line. And you have an understanding, obviously, of how those features may improve the performance of that revenue line, but they may also just be aimed at retaining the revenue line. So I think that's kind of not as formally done, certainly at stake at the moment. But from a product line perspective, when we're bringing in new revenue lines or significant changes to existing revenue lines, then definitely we give quite calculated and scientific forecasts to those drivers, and then actually a lot of the time set up in Mixpanel automated tracking of that. And it's something, particularly with alerts and things like that, that I'm putting a lot more effort into to kind of actually be automatically alerted when you're either hitting goals or missing goals. Within the product team, we have our own OKRs and tasks that we set against those OKRs. And I work with my team to make sure that all of those OKRs are actually backed by a report in Mixpanel that is able to then be tracked quantitatively. So, absolutely critical.
Okay. Well, obviously it's a webinar for the audience here, and obviously this is quite a topical and interesting point there. So we have another question from Grace, and so she is curious around how you actually prepare the forecast and budget on a quarterly and a yearly basis, and then also analyze and respond if unfortunately you haven't achieved one of those particular forecasts or budgets that you've set.
Yeah, so I think we probably take a wider view, and as I say, when we first did this for the first time last year, I think you love to just be more aggressive. You love to think that you can do something and it has an impact straight away. And the reality is that it's not the case. Rome wasn't built in a day, in a sense, and there's a huge, not a huge, but there's a revenue lag to anything that you take to market. So I think that's something that we've really taken into this year's budget is not be conservative, like still be ambitious and still want to push the envelope, but be, I guess, more realistic around, well, if you launch something in Q2, it's probably not actually going to hit until Q3 or Q4. So you're almost building today for the impact of tomorrow, like next financial year, like the stuff you do this financial year, well, that's going to really ramp up next financial year. So you kind of have this like multiple year forecast, and you're almost working a year in advance of yourself. I think this differs by company size. Like for us, our horizon is we have long-term kind of strategic horizons, but our kind of tactical horizon is 1 to 3 years. Whereas you talk to a company like Google, well, they're doing stuff today for 30 years time. They're planning out what they're doing in 30 years time, and they're doing it today. They're working on, just the other day kind of came out with a big quantum computing leap. Well, it's like what they're doing in quantum computing isn't actually going to hit the bottom line for 20 or 30 years. So that's kind of, I guess, a more high level answer to your question, Grace. I think in terms of then holding ourselves accountable to that, we track it obviously on an ongoing basis. We have monthly business reviews. You kind of understand why you're over, you're either hitting goals, maybe outstripping goals, or not hitting goals, and you adjust accordingly. Where do you need to focus more as a result? And I think you don't want to get caught in the trap, which I think at bigger companies is I think it's easy to fall into it, kind of pointing fingers and being like, well, why have we missed this goal? Like we've missed this goal, and who's responsible for it? I think it's more just around, let's go and understand why we've missed the goal and solve it. I think being very kind of execution focused is always the best approach to these things.
Cool. And then, you sort of mentioned exploration of like understanding why you may have exceeded or not met the target there. Can you maybe explain like how much of a role Mixpanel plays into sort of uncovering insights on how you're performing relative to some of those metrics?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think a really simple one for us was when we first launched Stake Black, we launched it pulling from the customer's balance that sat at stake. So when you invest in stake, at that time it was just Wall Street only. you obviously fund your stake account and you have a cash balance that sits at stake, and then you invest, buy and sell stocks, and it moves in and out of that cash balance. Well, when we first launched Stake Black, it took out of the cash balance. So when you upgraded to Stake Black, it would pull the funds from the cash balance. And really, we launched it. We had this, the market was absolutely going off, and at the beginning of 2021, it was like peak GameStop era, and Stake Black was doing really, really well, but had in terms of acquisition, but had terrible retention. And everyone was upper management and marketing like, what's the issue here? There's a product market fit issue. Like customers aren't finding value in it. They're dropping off because they do it for a month and they don't think it's worth it, and then they cancel or whatever it is. And that was about 6 months after we first implemented Mixpanel, and I kind of jumped into it because I was like, no, I actually think it's just something structural in the way that we've developed this product. And it became very clear that the major driver of retention through the analysis we've done in Mixpanel was the major driver of drop off, I should say, was insufficient funds in the balance. Makes sense. Customers fund their account, they upgrade Stake Black, they fully invest, and then the next month comes around and their balance is $0, or they've just bought a stock when we tried to charge them, and then they sell the stock, and so you just can't. It wasn't dependable. So I was like, I put that in front of everyone. I was like, look, let's stop all running around trying to solve, find ghosts. Basically, like, it's right in front of us. Like, the reality is that the payment method is causing huge drop off, and we need to fix the payment method. And so that's what we did. It probably took us longer than I would have liked, but we got there after probably about 9 months or so. And we decided to move to charging by card. So like any other kind of subscription model, you would pay with card. And that single change moved our retention from, I think it was about 30% to about 77%. So
wow,
over doubled.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a classic example of where quantitative data is incredibly powerful, and actually it can kind of, in a very in a few hours of work, day of work, whatever it is, like, you can get down to the real problem, and align everyone around that. I think there's nothing like having a data-backed argument.
Yeah, you can win any argument with a data-backed. So. Cool. There's a question there. I may let you read it because it looks like it's from an existing customer, so we may be able to get to that. But more in terms of when you're looking at your customers, when you're looking at Mixpanel, do you see much of a difference between like mobile and web behaviors? Are there people that go between the two, or are there definite cohorts that are sticking one versus the other?
Yeah, no, we were talking about this. We've talked about this a number of times, but there's definitely a difference between the two. We are, as I think more and more businesses are finding, we're heavily mobile dominated. I think the split would probably be about 80-20 in terms of overall usage. And there would be a very small cohort of users that are active across both mobile and web. I haven't been able to definitively improve this yet because, as I said, we're in the process of rebuilding our web platform. So purposely kind of haven't been investing and really integrating that into the wider data stack until we're on the new platform, and then make the investment in the new platform. But that cohort of customers that are active on both, and have a very very good suspicion that they'll be probably our highest value customers. And then obviously you'll have your web-only customers, which again are going to fall into a very different segment to our app only. So they probably also trade more. They trade high values. It's probably a bit of basically your desktop only users are more likely to be your older users in our case. And that may not always be the case depending on what company you are, but I think for us, we've got to be mobile first, but you cannot. I think a lot of businesses are kind of throwing desktop out the window, and I actually think that it's a mistake. I think that having a great desktop experience as well can be a huge differentiator in the market. And it's something that, particularly in our line of work, in investment, in financial wealth, effectively, banking in a sense, it's critical from a trust building perspective that you have that multi-platform approach, and that you have a great experience on both. So that's really what we're leaning into.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. In terms of, like, there may be some people who are watching on today who just sort of are curious to how you started building out a tech data stack, how you sort of started with Mixpanel. So if you're able to share any insights on that, that'd be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think I came from, in my previous role, we built it out entirely ourselves. We went, we pulled together a whole lot of open source technology, kind of stitched together, a pretty amazing data stack. But it was, our core competency wasn't data, and I think that is a really easy, I call it a mistake, but it's an easy outcome for businesses to get into, particularly technical businesses where there's a certain desire to build and own everything yourself. Coming into Stake, it was something that I was very passionate about not doing. It was critical that when I started, we had no data inside at all, and it made my job very hard. So it was actually kind of like top on my list. It's probably like the first thing I did, actually. Besides implementing Jira, that was the first thing, and then data. So I think Mixpanel is an amazing, a really, really amazing product, and what the quality of data analytics you're able to get via Mixpanel is just 20, 30, infinitely more than anything you'd be able to build yourself. For a company like Stake, I mean, if you're Google or Airbnb, there's obviously a point where that may be different. Phil, you probably hate me for saying that. Maybe it's not the case, but
hopefully Google's not on the call.
But yeah, I think for the vast majority of companies that 100% is the case. And we made the same decision with our engagement platform. So we use Braze for our engagement platform. We have Segment as our CDP that sits in between them.
Yep.
And I think that's another really powerful integration and kind of stitching it all together, because it significantly reduces the kind of technical overhead of being able to support multiple platforms within your what would traditionally be called a MarTech stack. And it also gives a lot more functionality from a no-code perspective in terms of like product managers and things kind of getting into it and connecting the dots. So yeah, I think that's really where we started. It was that build versus buy decision. Would heavily recommend the buy decision. In the case of the MarTech stack, you're just going to get way better outcomes for the level of investment. And ultimately, I think something that is often overlooked is the actual like user experience. When you build something yourself, you can obviously, from a back-end architecture perspective, you can get to an ideal architecture. It's all custom, it's built to you. But often what's overlooked is well, who's the end user here? In the case of Mixpanel, Braze and Segment, the end user is obviously your internal employees or the internal customer. And if it's a terrible experience for them, or they won't use it, and so you've got this, huge investment you've made that no one uses, or you end up just having a data team that's in it every day, and you kind of haven't really solved the problem. So for us, like something we've held, I've made sure that we held really, central to building out our data stack is that kind of premise of self-service, and that premise of, anyone in the business can jump in and answer their own questions, and ultimately, be more independent to go and do their work. So, that's something that I feel like in the last 3 months, we've kind of finally got to the stage where, where it's really starting to hit home. Everyone's really in it and across it. They understand the data structures, they understand what they can do, and it's starting to really drive some amazing outcomes. But I won't sugarcoat it. It's like anything in kind of implementation and transformation. It's a long slog, and Mixpanel makes it very easy. It's an amazing product, but the business transformation is something that you've got to own and really drive.
Yeah. But those comments about like self-serve, the user experience, like our product team would love to hear that, because that's exactly what they think about on a day-to-day process. Like really their design philosophy, getting as much as possible out of our core reports and making it super easy to use. And so just the final sort of follow-up question on that one, roughly how many people within Stake would be actually self-serving or using Mixpanel on a regular basis?
In total, we have, 135 in the company on Mixpanel, so the entire company. And I would say on a regular basis, we probably have like 30 to 50 people in it, once to twice a week. And Mixpanel also makes it easy. I can go and see, who's using it and who are our power users and things like that. And for example, the person who uses it the most in Stake is actually our founder and CEO. So I think if you've got them in it the most, then you're kicking goals. So that's, I think, as I say, it's been a long process, but we're in a really, really good position. And the culmination of, Braze, our engagement platform, Segment, Mixpanel, and them all kind of coming from the same source of truth, it's really starting to drive amazing outcomes in terms of just the ease of access to our data, the shareability between, insights and action. Below the line in terms of engagement experiences we're able to build out in the product, but also above the line in terms of sharing first-party data to marketing platforms and things like that, to build lookalike audiences, to target in different ways, to build suppression tactics. It's all, it's all coming together and absolutely critical.
Yep. Tom's very engaged. He's interested in the content that you would recommend. It's a question from earlier, but he's also put a question here. What does a great product team look like to you? What's the composition and ratios? How should they operate? And what values do you look for in building a team? So maybe you could tie it back to some of those content blog recommendations. But yeah, that was a question from Tom, and we'll start to address more of the questions in the chat now.
For sure. I think fundamentally it differs depending on what business you're in. I think for Stake, we're pretty technical. Like, you have to be pretty technical in the product team. That's the nature of the business. It always has been. In different businesses, that may not be the case. So, I know and have worked with a lot of PMs that are less technical and more kind of, I guess, strategic and stakeholder management and all the rest. I think the Stake with that, but really focused on execution. So I think it matters, but it depends on what business you're in. But generally, at its core premise, the product team has to be capable, independent. I think the kind of mini CEO in inverted commas is actually not a bad descriptor, because you're at the bleeding edge of the business. There's no one really like over your shoulder giving you a real structure as to what to do day to day. It's kind of really driven by what you see as being most important, aligned to the business outcomes. So I think that's critical. Probably ambitious and independent is probably two good descriptors, I'd say. In terms of composition ratios, 50-50, male, female, that'd be ideal. I think that's something that actually I hold really core. Our team at Stake is minus me, we would be 50-50, which is good. And it's actually brings a lot of great insight, to be honest, having a team well split like that. So yeah, I think in terms of then, I guess, other composition ratios and seniority and stuff like that, I'm a big believer in bringing on people who are really hungry to get stuck in. I think that suits the stake vibe, our ethos. It's something that I definitely lean towards is bringing on, I guess, maybe less experienced, but really, really keen to get stuck in at work. Again, that would differ depending on what business you're in. And I think in terms of values, how they should operate, as I say, being independent is critical. Being able to be given little direction and kind of take the ball by the horns and run with it and work it out, come back and present a solution. It doesn't necessarily have to be the right solution, but getting somewhere is better than getting nowhere. And allowing, being open to feedback and allowing to be molded by not only your peers and seniors, but also the rest of the business. So in that sense, it's like ambitious and independent, but humble in a sense, and not you've got to be willing to understand where you need to concede, and on the other hand where you need to push. And I think that's really what I look for in team building, and also what I encourage my team to be on an everyday basis. So it's really my role is to make sure that my team is working to the best of their ability, and that they're having fun in doing that.
And they have an ability to use Mixpanel or product analytics to come forward with a data-backed view on the product decision. Alois has got an interesting question here, a problem maybe he's facing, where they have a high number of downloads, then end up with a low conversion. So he's curious to know whether you think this is caused by marketing or a poor product experience.
I don't think that's uncommon, to be honest. I assume you're talking about like downloads, the number that obviously you see on the App Store versus and installs and things versus like signups. I actually really don't think that that's that uncommon. It often is a very high point of drop off for a number of different reasons. I think the key thing is probably being able to map it through your entire funnel. Like, is that a trend that you see? Like, if you're doing paid advertising, or you have a good gauge on organic, for example, are you seeing that number of customers come through the pipeline, get to the point of download, and then drop off before they sign up? Some strategies to combat that may be, okay, well, let's pull sign up onto our website effectively. So do the first phase of sign up on the website, so that you get first party data before you hand them off to the download, which may be a point of friction. So at least then, if you lose them when they go and download the app, you've got the first party data to go and re-engage them on. But another common thing is that you actually don't see that volume coming through the pipeline, and you have this huge spike of installs. So it's kind of like, oh, we only had 5,000 kind of come through our pipeline before install, but then we've got 10,000 installs, but then 4,500 signed up. Well, if you look at the install to sign up, you're going to say, well, you've lost 55%. But if you actually look at how many came through your funnel, you've retained 80% or whatever. So I think having a good understanding of what's happening prior to the install can help give you insights into how reliable that install number is, and how representative it is of your actual rates of drop off. So yeah, I think that's probably point one, is kind of work out whether it is the problem that it's presenting to be. And then point two is, okay, if that is a key point of drop off, how do we actually go and reduce the impact of that, or at least tool ourselves to go and re-engage those customers if in fact they do drop off at that point.
So unfortunately, we've only got 1 minute left, and there is still some good questions flowing through. So we'll follow up on those. But I wanted to thank Alex for being so generous with your time today and sharing your insights. Everyone is very thirsty for information about product, and everyone's interested in investing. So a great marriage between the two there, and really appreciate you sharing your insights there. And then for anyone, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can follow up there. We'll have these questions that are flowing through. And also on Mixpanel, you can always sign up for a free account, or you can download some of our demo data sets so you can really get a sense of Mixpanel firsthand. But yeah, thanks for everyone for dialing in. And Alex, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it very much. We're looking forward to the next In Conversation session.
Exactly. No, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, as I said, Mixpanel is absolutely central to what we do at Stake. And so thanks for all you do. You've from one product manager to to another great product-led business. So it's really amazing.
Fantastic. Thank you, and thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers.